You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show.
The Cauldron of Hate, a story by Grant Baciocco.
Chapter 7. A half hour later, the whistle blew, signaling the start of the first ever Saddle River City Death Race game. They were taking on the Gentner Hardware Hammers, and the Hammers, true to their name, came out of the gate hammering and didn't let up at all the first half. They ran complete circles around the death race, and by the end of the first half, the Hammers were killing the death race 4-0, an unprecedented score in Saddle River City youth soccer. As the players drank their water and ate their oranges during halftime, Coach Templin was speechless. He saw his future mayoral career disappearing before his eyes. He'd be known as the worst soccer coach in the city's history because of this. He threw his clipboard down on the grass, as was his wont to do, and crossed his arms, fuming. Then he glanced over towards the bench and saw the Cauldron of Hate. The three villains were sitting there as cool as could be. They looked as if they had not a care in the world. This infuriated the coach even more. He stormed over to them and began yelling in hushed tones so as to not upset the children. "I suppose you three have been watching this massacre," the coach said. The Blinding Skull nodded. "We have been, yes." The Blinding Skull's nonchalantness infuriated Coach Templin even more. His right eyebrow was now doing a waltz, his left a cha-cha. "Well, where is this win you promised me?" The Blinding Skull stood slowly from the bench, turned to the Living Lump and the Plant Lady, and nodded. They nodded in return, and the three of them began walking towards the sideline of the field. Wait a minute, hold it," Coach Templin croaked nervously. "What are you three going to do?" The Blinding Skull turned to him. "We're going to watch the Death Rays win." "You three are nuts," Coach Templin said. Then he began pacing back and forth, mumbling to himself. "I gotta mix things up. I gotta move things around. First thing I gotta do is take that shrimp Reese out of the goalie position. He's as good as a screen door on a submarine." Suddenly, there were screams as the ground began to shake. Coach Templin just had time to think earthquake when the shaking stopped and he was hoisted off the ground by his shirt collar. He was spun around and found himself face to face with the Living Lump, who was now holding the man 4 feet in the air. Put me down this instant," Coach demanded. The Living Lump stared at him in the eye, and his lips curled in a snarl. He spoke calmly, but with an intensity the Blinding Skull and the Plant Lady had never seen in him before. "Reese stays in as goalie." What?" Coach Templin flustered. "Reese stays in as goalie," the Living Lump repeated. "Got it?" Coach Templin began to nod. Yeah, sure, whatever you say. Just put me down." The Living Lump curled his lips in a snarl once more and slowly lowered Coach Templin to the ground. Once back on his feet, the coach straightened out his collar. He slowly backed away from the lump and turned to the kids. "Okay, gang, let's get out there for the second half," he barked, trying to sound like a man who wasn't shaking to his core. "And the Reese?" "Yeah, Coach," a Reese squawked. Coach Templin looked back at the lump. "Get in there as goalie." "You got it, Coach." Reese bounded towards the goal with a smile on his face. A smile slowly appeared on the Living Lump's face as well. Chapter 8. It was the strangest kickoff the sport had ever seen. The Hammers center forward, Darren Warren, kicked the ball toward his teammate. Or he attempted to kick the ball. This was the strange detail that was debated for weeks after. Most assume he missed the ball, but the ref, several of the players on the Hammers team, and several parents watching saw Darren make contact with the ball, but it did not move at all, almost as if the grass was holding the ball firmly in place. The Hammers stood dumbfounded. The ref wasn't blowing the whistle, so Taylor took this to mean that the ball was in play and charged forward and kicked the ball as hard as she could. The ball sailed across the field from center line towards the Hammers' goal. As it began to roll across the grass, it surprisingly picked up steam, rolling faster and faster toward the goal. It zoomed through the Hammers' defensive players' legs as it raced towards the goal, almost as if the grass itself was pushing the ball forward. The goalie, who'd been asleep most of the game, snapped out of his daze as the ball sped towards him. He made sure his gloves were on good and prepared to make a spectacular diving save. The ball was closing in, 15 feet, 10 feet. At 5 feet, the goalie leapt into the air, and as he sailed for the ball, his eyes bulged out when the ball suddenly made a 90-degree turn out from underneath him, and then another 90-degree turn to roll across the goal line into the goal. The Saddle River City Death Race players exploded in raucous cheers. They ran to Taylor and congratulated her on her amazing goal-in-one, the likes of which had never quite been seen before. The Hammers players, coach, and parents were dumbfounded. No one could explain the amazing 90-degree turning kick they had just witnessed, but the referee, not seeing anything wrong with the goal, allowed it to stand. For the first time in the game, the Saddle River City Death Rays were on the scoreboard. The score was now 4-1. The mystery of the ball with its own mind wasn't the end of the oddness of the game that day. There were several times where it seemed as if the Hammers players were literally rooted to the spots where they stood. They later said that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get their feet to move, almost as if the grass had grabbed hold of their cleats and would not let them move. This happened twice and allowed the Saddle River City Death Rays to score twice more, bringing the score to 4-3. About halfway through the second half, Death Rays player Chris fouled one of the Hammers players accidentally. As the Hammers player ran forward to make her penalty kick, the ground suddenly shook violently, causing her to only slightly tap the ball, causing it to roll a few feet. As everyone looked around to see what had caused the field to shake so violently and suddenly, no one noticed Arise kicking the ball back out to Zoe, who had passed it on to Scott, who had taken it midfield and kicked it over to Taylor. By the time the Hammers players knew what was happening, Taylor was within goal range and kicked the ball hard, causing it to soar above the goalie's outstretched arms and into the net. As the players cheered Taylor, who'd now just tied the game with 5 minutes left to play, the Blinding Skull looked over at the Living Lump and gave the big man a thumbs up. The Living Lump smiled back and stepped out of the small crater he'd made when he jumped as high as he could and came crashing down on the field seconds before the Hammers player was to kick her penalty kick. Coach Templin was flabbergasted. He had no idea where this sudden streak of luck had come from for his team. He glanced over at the Blinding Skull, who was staring intently at the game, twirling his car keys around in his hand. Something was fishy here, very fishy, but he had no idea what. So as the last 5 minutes ticked by, he decided to keep an eye on the villain. The last 5 minutes were exciting, too. Both the Hammers and the Death Rays played their hardest. There were good kicks and amazing saves by both teams. In the last 30 seconds, though, a Hammers player broke free and charged towards the goal. Little Arise was in a near panic as the much bigger kid barreled towards him. He stretched out his hands and, fearing the worst, closed his eyes. The Hammers player took a huge kick and the ball sailed right towards Arise's head. At that moment, Coach Templin saw the Blinding Skull stop twirling his keys and press a small button on the key fob. The coach couldn't be sure as the cheers of the parents were so loud, but he could have sworn there was a faint humming sound that filled the area. He quickly glanced to the ball that was seconds away from impacting Arise's noggin and swore he could see it slowing down. The ball did indeed stop its forward momentum and begin traveling in the opposite direction right at the moment one of the black pentagons came in contact with Arise's forehead. To everyone else but Coach Templin, it looked as if Arise had made a spectacular headbutt save. The ball began traveling away from Arise's head. To everyone's astonishment, including Arise's, who'd just opened one eye a smidge to look, the ball began picking up steam, spinning faster and faster as it raced towards the Hammers' goal. Hammers players tried to get in front of the ball, but it just seemed to be going faster and faster as it passed the midfield line. Players tried to race it, but the ball just kept picking up speed. The Hammers goalie readied himself as the ball approached. There is a physical phenomenon known as the Doppler blue shift. Basically, it states that an object moving towards an observer will appear noticeably bluer to the naked eye of the observer. The faster the object is traveling towards the observer, the bluer the object looks. To the naked eye of the goalie for the Gentner Hardware Hammers, the normally black and white soccer ball was now a bright blue ball of energy flying directly towards his midsection. At the last minute, the goalie bailed and the ball sailed into the goal and came to a dead stop instantly on a little patch of ground next to the back of the net. The whistle to end the game blew, but not before the ref raised his hands to signal that the goal was good. The Saddle River City Death Rays had won the game 5-4. As the Death Rays tackled each other in celebration, Coach Templin watched as the Cauldron of Hate looked at each other smiling. The three of them sauntered to the bench and sat down as they watched the kids celebrate. The Hammers goalie picked himself up and began walking towards where the ball had come to a stop. He bent down to pick it up and found it immovable. He was also suddenly aware of the humming that Coach Templin had heard earlier. He tugged at the ball with all his strength, but it wouldn't budge. Then, in a split second, the humming stopped and the ball came free in his hands. Coincidentally, this was at the exact same moment Coach Templin had seen the blinding skull push the small button on his key fob. The coach's eyebrows were now doing a frantic interpretive dance number as he realized what had happened here today. After the 2-4-6-8 Who Do We Appreciate chants and the shaking of hands of the players from both sides, the Saddle River City Death Rays, the Cauldron of Hate, and Coach Templin found themselves at the snack shack for celebratory milkshakes. The kids were still walking on air from their amazing come-from-behind win, and little Reese was the center of attention for making his legendary, game-winning full-field headbutt. The Blinding Skull and the Plant Lady were laughing and talking wildly with the kids. The Living Lump was in heaven, guzzling down his numerous milkshakes and listening to Reese tell his version of what had happened. The only person not joining in the fun was Coach Templin, who sat sipping his peach-flavored milkshake slowly. He stared closely at the Blinding Skull. He knew what had happened on that field today, and he knew there was only one thing that could be done. Reese was the last player to get picked up from the snack shack. The Cauldron of Hate stood with Coach Templin as Reese's parents pulled out of the parking lot and drove off down North J Street. Once the car was out of eyesight, Coach Templin turned towards the three villains. "I figured it out," Coach Templin said, looking down at an ice cream cone that someone had dropped on the sidewalk. "I don't think anyone else did, but I figured it out." The Blinding Skull, Plant Lady, and Living Lump turned to look at the coach. "I guess it shouldn't have come as a huge surprise, being who you three are," he continued. "I just thought that maybe you had changed, but you haven't, obviously." The Blinding Skull looked over at Plant Lady and Lump. They looked as confused as he was. He looked back to the coach. "I don't think we're quite following you, Coach." The coach's eyebrows started twitching. "You cheated. You cheated!" He stood fuming. "The Plant Lady get in the grass to guide the ball into the net and trip up the other players and make sure only our team could kick the ball. Lump causing the ground to shake during that penalty kick. And whatever magnetic device you had planted under the opposing goal. You cheated." The Blinding Skull raised two hands and looked around nervously. "Okay, Coach Templin, calm down. Let's just take it easy. Take it easy. Take it easy," Coach Templin screamed in a whisper. "Do you know what you've done here today? You haven't just won a game. No, you have cheated those kids. Built them up, given them false confidence. False confidence, meaning fake. The celebration here, the pride these kids felt tonight, Reese's hero moment, it's all fake because you cheated." The Blinding Skull nodded. "But we had promised you a win and felt that it's not about winning at all. It's about playing the game right and being good sports." "But even you said they were a terrible team and there's no way they could win." "They are, but they aren't going to learn to be better by getting fake wins." "Jiminy cricket!" Coach Templin kicked the trash can near the front door. The Cauldron of Hate jumped back. The coach stood there seething for a moment. Then a look of despair crossed his face. "You know what this means, don't you? You know what this means? This means I can be implicated in your cheating. They'll think that I asked you to help get a win. I'm ruined. I'm ruined. I'll never be able to run for mayor because you three cheated." The Plant Lady spoke up softly. "Dear, we didn't mean to implicate you in anything. If people find out, we'd tell them that you weren't in on it." "Right. And you three are so honest, they'll just automatically believe you." Look, Coach, I'm really sorry, the Blinding Skull said quietly. It's just that cheating is all we know how to do. We don't know how else to win other than by cheating. And how has that strategy gotten you so far in life, Have you won much? The living lump sighed heavily. No, because cheaters lose in the end. You win by working hard, following the rules, being true, something you three know nothing about, not a single thing. The Cauldron of Hate lowered their heads. There was a brief moment of silence. Coach Templin took a deep breath and said simply, I quit. I can no longer coach this team. They have been compromised, and I can't risk my future goals being associated with you three. The plant lady held up her hand. No, Coach, please. We'll turn ourselves in and face the punishment. The coach shook his head. It's too late. I quit. Without another word, he turned and walked to his pickup truck. The Cauldron of Hate watched in silence as he drove away.
You've been listening to The Cauldron of Hate. To download a PDF of the chapter you just heard, visit cauldronofhate.com. The Cauldron of Hate was written by Grant Baciocco. The story was edited by Liz Brown, and the audio was edited by Steven Staver. Music by Dan Ring. Special thanks to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who make this content possible. And a special mention to those who supported the producer level, including Dorothy Baciocco, Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Tony Urbano, David Akers, Jamie Donmeyer, and Vicky Sebring. To find out more about becoming a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. This episode is copyright 2021 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Baciocco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com.
You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.